Welcome, friends. I'm Chris. I'm from Transformation Nation Yoga and Wellness. Welcome to Sunrise Yin. This is going to be a fire and wood sequence. What I think you'll need in order to be safe, to enjoy, and get the most out of your practice are a yoga mat. You could also use like a carpeted area. That would be just fine for today's practice. At least one blanket. You don't have to do it this way. I like a blanket that's folded in half, laid out across my mat for the entirety of the practice so that the long edge of the half folded blanket is perpendicular to the long edge of my mat. I like to have a bolster. If you don't have a bolster, a couch cushion can be a surrogate that works really well. And I'd like you to have one, or better yet, two yoga blocks. So pause your recording, roll out your mat, gather up your props, and when you're ready, press play, and I'll meet you on your mat for our fire and wood practice. So we'll get started in a seated position. So find a seat that's comfortable for you. We're not going to be here a super long time, but I'd like you to ground as if we were. So in this fire and wood practice, we're going to be working on the energetic lines. Think a lot about the insides of the legs. So liver meridian and the whole outside plane of the body, gallbladder meridian. So lengthen out your spinal column. Let your soft tissues descend down toward the earth, and let's open up with a cleansing breath. So on an inhale, lengthen along your spinal column, big in the chest, big in the belly in your inhale. Exhale, open your mouth, make a ah sound. And of course, I'm aware that as we inhale, we can only truly inhale through the mouth and the nose, and we can only truly inhale into the lungs. But I like you to visualize the breath traveling along your spinal column. So as you inhale, maybe visualize from the base of your spine, the breath rising up toward the crown of your head. And then each exhale, let the breath fall down the spinal column, exiting out the base of your spine. Anytime you notice thoughts start to float into your consciousness, you don't need to push them away, but recognize them for what they are. Give them a little bit of acknowledgement. And then bring your attention rather back to you, the breath traveling up and down along your spinal column. And if you notice anywhere as the breath travels up or down along the spine, if it starts to get stuck, if you feel some areas of stuckness, notice that. Shift your attention to that area where it's stuck. I'm not sure stuckness is a word. And any parts along the spine where the breath gets sticky in its path. Start to find some other present moment anchors, maybe the sense of a cool rush of air around your nostrils on each inhale, or a warm rush of air in your upper lip as you exhale, or anything else in your ambient environment that's most provocative in your experience right now. And then if your eyes were closed down, gently blink your eyes open. And the first true yin shape of our practice today is going to be a passive squat. Now, this leaves us with lots of options. For some, if you can have your feet flat on the earth and just sink your hips down toward the earth, deep flexion of both hips, feel free to do that. Not everybody can do that. Would like your feet about hip distance apart, toes turned out to the outside. One option here is a wall, to use a wall as a support. And this can be a really nice place for some people. So we have the squatting action in the hips. We have lots of support from the back. So that's one option. Second option is a block, one or two blocks under the seat. Now I'm on a carpeted surface, so I may need a little bit more support. But one thing that I'll ask with whatever you choose for your shape today, your squatting shape, is have the soles of your feet flat on the earth. Right, so this is often taught, and it's not wrong to do a passive squat with the heels lifted, but what I've learned in my practice is it's not particularly a pathway toward eventually getting the hips to descend down toward the earth. Now, in a vinyasa formatted class, we would press the elbows into the inner thighs into the elbows, maybe hands at heart center. That's fine. What I would actually prefer is you to find a wet noodle sensation. Let your fingers drop down toward the earth, and even maybe your forehead relax down toward the earth. Or if anything, if you had your elbows in your inner thighs, your hands might come up on your temples to give your neck some support. So if the heels tend to lift, but you have enough capacity for flexions in your hips to almost get down, you might notice I've got a bolster up under my heels. You could do the same thing with a folded blanket. This, in my view, is much more of a pathway toward a healthy and natural squat. Notice where you need sensation to make this shape work, regardless of whether your back is up against the wall, you have no support, you sit on a block, your heels supported by some prop. Notice the tendency, probably for most bodies, I think, for the hips to drift back, the weight to drift into the heels of the feet. And then shift enough weight into the heels, into the balls of the feet rather, to maintain this position. But everything else, if you can relax it, go totally wet noodle. Just a comfortable, natural breath is just fine. If you are at a higher level of sensation, so just as a reminder, we're looking to straddle a threshold between discomfort and pain here. So on a scale from 0 to 10, we want a 4 to a 6. If you're above that and that's okay for you, you might choose a 4-8 down regulating breath with a 4 count inhale through your nose, followed by an 8 count exhale through your mouth, making a ha sound. In traditional Chinese medicine, the acquired emotion that's most often associated with the wood element meridian, so liver and gallbladder, is anger. I'm going to talk a little bit today about anger. I'll talk about anger as a natural emotion. I'll talk about anger as a habitual tendency and maybe some reasons for that and potentially some things to do about it if it's manifesting in a way that's not skillful. But I didn't want to start from the idea that anger is a healthy natural emotion that we have for a reason. Alright, we're going to start to shift out of this squat, and I don't care how you get out of it. I just care that you use good body mechanics. And our next shape is going to be dragonfly. I'm going to support um, my seat with a bolster. Maybe have 2 blocks close by. Take the feet out nice and wide. And then you could, if you like, lengthen along your spinal column first, and then walk your hands forward. Maybe release your chest down toward the earth. No, you could just stay here with stacked joints. Float your head over your shoulders, over your hips. That's dragonfly. One more option for people who self-identify as having tight lower back and hamstrings. The dragonfly in the wall is lovely. So we still get the opening of these energetic lines along the inside of the legs. We have all this support for the back. So all that rounding comes out of the back. So I mentioned, one thing, like we're hard on ourselves in general. People in our society can be pretty tough on ourselves. And sometimes we're not very kind to ourselves when we kind to ourselves simply because we have healthy, natural human emotions. And anger is one of these, and I see this in my life, and I see this in the lives of other people who I know well. I think it's important to start with the idea that, like, a rational anger is a really healthy emotion, right? So anger might be telling us something about a situation not being okay for us, or it might be communicating a need that we're not satisfying for ourselves, or we're not asking for help for other people to satisfy. So sometimes an anger is a message from our bodies and from our psyches that we need to have a difficult conversation, or we need to set a boundary. The boundary often probably looks like saying no. What happens sometimes with me is I find an emotional response of anger coming up where even almost in the moment, I can look at it and go, wow, that seems really out of proportion to the situation. And then trying to identify what exactly was the trigger that happened here that triggered that deep, like that really powerful emotional response in me. Check in with your body, notice your current level of sensation. If you've opened up some space, you're in a 4 to a 6 and you've opened up some space and you're seated on your seat, you could fold further forward. Maybe blocks or a bolster under your forehead or under your chest, or maybe your heart just sinks down toward the earth. If your legs are up against the wall, I'm at about a 7 right now, but you could walk the heels a little further down the wall. So one way of looking at anger is from an Ayurvedic standpoint. If someone is pitta dominant in their dosha, this is a fire and water dosha. It happens to be my dosha, or they have some other, their dosha of birth is a different dosha, it's vata or it's kapha, but they're out of balance in the direction of pitta. Then when we're under stress, where we go to, our habitual tendency is usually irritation and anger. Right. The good news from an Ayurvedic standpoint is this is something that we can do something about. The other thing to notice is like I read these Yung Pueblo Instagram posts, and he really moves me deeply. He has really great things to say. One of the things he says is your initial emotional response is not who you are right now. That's who you were in the past. It's what you do in response to that emotional response. So do we act out in an irrationally angry way? Are we unkind to ourselves or to others? But for me, sometimes I have to notice, like, this is like one of my triggers is traffic, right? And a vehicle that's in front of me, maybe not doing anything that's wrong, not violating any law, not doing anything discourteous. They're just in a place that doesn't happen to be convenient for me at the time. Sometimes my response is anger. When I notice that, recognizing what's happening and stepping back to take a breath. Okay, maybe this is going to be okay. All right, I'd like you to come out of this. So if you're on your seat, you can start to lift yourself up first. And then once you're lifted up, or if your legs are up against the wall, bring your hands behind your knees, start pulling your heels closer in towards your body. And then you can roll off onto either side. Press yourself up. And we're going to go into any resting shape. So I'm going to choose half frog with my down on my belly, with my arms goal posted to the side, and my left cheek on the mat. My gaze is to the right. But you could choose any resting pose. We're going to start the transition to our next shape. So whatever your resting shape is, press yourself up onto your knees. And we're going to choose either shoelace or square. So let me demo square first. This will be less sensation for most bodies. So we'll start. I'm going to elevate my seat, and I'll place my right shin parallel to the top edge of my mat, hook the pinky edge blade of my left foot on the outside of my right thigh. Now notice a tendency, if you look down between your legs, if you're choosing square, that right heel is going to want to start to creep in towards your seat, towards your butt. So I would like you, when you look between your legs, to maintain a triangle shape. Right, so you can, if you notice with my prosthetic hip here, that knee is pretty far elevated. You could pad up in between the lifted left knee and the lower right ankle, or like in my book, in terms of making progress in the development of mobility, the block on top of that left knee is a good option. Now, one other option is shoelace pose, and I'm going to cue this differently than I would have in the past. From a tabletop, if you take your right knee forward and that right shin angled to your left, wrap left knee over the right, left shin angled back toward the seat, and then a block under the seat. Ooh, this sets it up at a fairly high sensation. And from here, if you wanted more sensation, you could start. I'm at like a 7, so I'm not going to change anything, but you could start shifting the heels forward toward the top edge of the mat. But either version of this is shoelace, and square is also just fine. So one more option for some bodies like me, I'm at a 7 right now. I'm already a little out of our yin threshold. But for some people, this is really easy. You could also walk the hands forward and fold forward over the legs. So sometimes when the anger comes up for me, I just need to go into inquiry and ask, what is it exactly? What's my unmet need right now, or what's happening with me? And sometimes what I find it is for me is it's not anger, it's some other emotion, but it's an emotion that for whatever reason I feel like doesn't have a very good public face. So fear, shame, and grief for me sometimes manifest initially. I think it's anger. So the key for me is to drop into what's the embodied sensation, right? So fear, anger, and shame all manifest, they all embody in very, very different places in my body. So noticing where that emotion physically manifests can be my cue toward identifying it and then holding space for it. So we're going to start to shift out of this. So you can lift up any way that you like. So for the way I came into shoelace, I'm going to rock the knees forward, lift the seat. I'm going to unwind the right leg, and I'm changing positions just for demonstration purposes, just to show this from a different angle. Wrap my right knee over my left. Place for me a block in between my seat. Now, not everybody's going to need the block. Ooh, and then sitting back, and this sets it up with high sensation. For square pose, this time left shin will be parallel to the top edge of the mat. Hook the pinky edge blade of your right foot on the top of your left thigh, and watch for that left heel creeping in towards your seat. Keep pressing it back out forward, so when you look between your legs, you see that nice triangle shape. Sometimes what I view as irrational anger when it comes up for me, where like in the instant after either I have an outburst, I have an angry response, or even the internal anger response, I go, wow, that was strong. That doesn't seem like it really fits the situation. Sometimes it's a trauma response. If I'm thoughtful and if I really look at it, I can trace it back. And whatever happened in that moment put me back into a time frame where I felt like I was victimized, where someone hurt me. I wasn't in a position where either I wasn't in a position where I felt like I could take care of myself and protect myself, or at least I didn't feel like I was. Right? And again, all of this calls for self, in my view, it calls for self-compassion and kindness. Because when those trauma responses come up for me, what I'm learning is that's an area where um, my psyche, my body needs some attention and some love to help me work through the rest of the trauma cycle. I'm reading this book right now called The Gap and the Gain. And this came to my attention. My Ayurveda and business teacher, Kate Stillman, is theming the next quarter of her Body Thrive program, in which I'm a member and a participant, around this book. And she talked about this principle, and I was sucked in right away. So I downloaded the book on Audible, and I started to listen to it. And I'm going to be theming parts of my next level human program around this as well. And if you're not familiar with this, it's a really powerful idea. And this idea is that um, the way that most people frame their experience around whether or not they're successful um, really leads to a lot of unhappiness. And according to this book, like so-called successful from external experiences, like really driven people are the most prone to this. So what they say is when we have when we have something in mind that we want for our lives, often we create this ideal. And the ideal is sort of like a compass direction. We're never really heading exactly in that direction, but it's a guiding principle. It's something that pulls us in that direction. The ideal itself is probably not attainable, but there are many goals along the way that could be. All right, we're going to transition out of this shape. So if it's square pose, if you or shoelace, if you fold it forward first, lift yourself up, and then unwind your legs. I'm into a tabletop shape. I'd like you to have a bolster close by. Place the bolster in between your hands. So roughly, what, a third or a half of the bolster is below the level of your wrists. Frog pose. Turn your toes to the outside. Start to walk your knees out wide. Walk your ankles out in line with your knees. Keep your hips in line with your knees rather than letting the hips drop forward, which will be the natural human tendency, or pressing them back into more of a child's pose. And then release your heart down to the bolster or to the mat. You could also use blocks here. Right. So what tends to happen is we think that this ideal is going to be the thing that makes us happy. And if the ideal itself is inherently, intrinsically unattainable, that's a pathway toward misery, right? Because we know we can never be there. But they also say what happens is when we're on this path to this unattainable ideal, this guiding principle, that's a beautiful idea that can help us make really productive gains in our lives, but in and of itself is probably not something we're going to be able to achieve. We measure ourselves along the way. So if you look at a continuum with a start point on one end and the ideal on the other, and then our current place, where are we on this path, is somewhere in the middle. Maybe it's really close to start. Maybe it's closer to midway or closer to that ideal. What Dr. Benjamin Hardy says is most of the time when we evaluate ourselves, we're looking at the space between where we are now and the ideal, right? The unattainable ideal. So that's the gap between where we think we want to be and where we are. Right? And then we're dissatisfied, regardless of how much we've gotten done, regardless of our progress, we're dissatisfied because of the gap between our current present state and what that idealized state is. What they said is what happy people tend to do is we have the same model. We have the start point, the ideal on either ends of the continuum. We have our present position. But what people who tend towards happiness do instead is when they evaluate their progress, they're not looking at the gap between their present state and the ideal. They're looking at the gain between the start point and where they are now. That's powerful. So one example is I listen to this news program. Like I don't listen to a lot of news because it's not great for my nervous system, but I listen to NPR's Up First, NPR Politic podcast, and NPR's Consider This every day. So it's a total of about 40 minutes of news consumption. And I feel like it's pretty well balanced. For me, it's a trusted source. And I heard this story, the NPR Politics podcast, every Friday they do a segment called something like Can't Let It Go. And each of the commentators shares something, sometimes politically related, sometimes something else in the news that really captured their attention and they can't stop thinking about. And one was there was this woman in Louisiana. Her nickname is Hurricane. I don't remember what her full name is. But anyway, she was in this track and field event at 105 years old, and she wins the world record for speed for a 100-yard dash. And she ran this in a minute, 2 seconds, right? 62 seconds. And when they interviewed her afterwards, she'd set the world record every year at the age 101 to 104. They created the 105 age bracket for her. And so she wins this world record. And then they asked her, and she said she's not satisfied because what she really wanted was for her time to be less than a minute. Right? She missed it by 2 seconds. That's gap thinking, right? She had this idealized goal. Maybe it was attainable for her, maybe it wasn't. And when she evaluated herself, she was evaluating but from her present state to the ideal. She missed it. She missed the mark, so she was disappointed. And one of the journalists who was interviewing her asked the question, well, does it bring you any satisfaction that your time that you got was like much less than your age? And her answer was right away, was a firm no. Right, so that might drive her to push herself to run harder and work harder. But for 105 years old, to be running a 100-yard dash at all, to me is pretty remarkable. And to be doing it in 62 seconds, God, what a gain! What an amazing accomplishment! What would happen for her if she was able to view herself from the perspective of the gain from her start point to that 62-second time that won this world record? And how often do we do this to ourselves? Almost everyone I know evaluates themselves the same way. And this is one of the things that the authors of this book says is that if we want to be happy, we need to constantly evaluate where we are. And when we're feeling dissatisfied, ask ourselves, am I in gap thinking or am I in gain thinking? So where this comes into play with our theme for today is sometimes when we have that anger response, at least for me, it's because I notice some kind of difference between how I think things should be or should have been and where they actually are, which by definition is gap thinking. But what could happen if I reframe this, everything that comes up that seems to be dissatisfying, and I set it up as a gain type thought? All right, we're going to shift out of this pose. Start to rock the crown of your head forward until your hips dip down toward the earth. Walk your legs back behind you. Ooh. And this is going to be a big ask, but right away we're going to go into sleeping pigeon. So from tabletop, slide your right knee forward to the outside of your right wrist. Right shin could be parallel to the top edge of your mat. For most bodies, it will not. Tuck your toes under your left foot. Walk that left leg back behind you. Maybe you open your heart first, maybe not. And then fold forward again, maybe onto a bolster, maybe onto a couple of blocks. Maybe your heart comes all the way down to the earth. Right, so whenever we want something to be different than where it is right now, we're in gap thinking. Right? And it doesn't make us bad people, it makes us human. And we're in a society that's really kind of groomed us for this kind of thinking. Right, so it would be really easy to come up with the idea that because we're in this gap thinking, it's going to drive us toward greater results. But I don't know that that's always the case. And in this book, they gave a couple of anecdotes, and one was a football player who was like a world-class American football player who everybody idolized and had all this great success in his football career, but came into controversy because he made this statement that he didn't need football, and he was a complete and whole person without football. And people in the football world and the professional sports world lost their damn minds. And I thought, well, how could he be dedicated to football if he doesn't need football? How can he be that dedicated? So he did a bunch of follow-up interviews with his manager, and he clarified and said, look, I love football. Obviously, I've prioritized this in my life. Obviously, I work as hard as anyone. I work as hard as anyone. And I don't need football to feel good about myself. I don't need football to be a healthy, whole, and complete human being. Right. But because he'd relaxed around this idea and he's primarily in gain thinking, He's able to realize amazing success. Another example they gave was this Olympic speed skater who consistently started faster than anyone and in training was just amazing, but tended to fall apart in competition, would start out really fast and then would fall short. Goes to an Olympic competition, competes in the first two events, falls short of medals, right? Really crushed, disappointed in himself. One more event comes up and it's the 1,000-meter speed skate, which he self identifies as being his weakest event. But he consciously goes into this mind shift, and instead of going into this with the idea, um, like really driving himself and pushing himself into this, he decided to just have fun and skate. And he went into what he considered to be his weakest event with this change in mindset, looking at this more in the gain. Like, I wonder what I can gain from this experience. I wonder what I can gain on past times in the 1,000-meter, and won the gold medal. So examples like this seem to make it pretty clear to me that we don't need to drive and push ourselves in that way in order for us to be successful. All right, friends, walk your hands up under your shoulders. Lift yourself up. Ooh, slide that right knee back, come into tabletop, maybe a counter stretch, maybe circling that right hip with the left hip out, maybe stepping your right foot behind your left foot, shifting your gaze out over your left shoulder. And then when you've had some time in a counter pose, we'll set up for the other side. Shift your left knee forward to the far left-hand edge of your mat. Maybe the shin's parallel to the earth. Probably not. Probably heel close to the groin. Tuck your toes under your right foot. Walk that right leg long behind you. I didn't mention this on the other side, but if you get knee pain here, flex the toes on your left foot back towards your left knee. If there's no knee pain, relax the toes. You could put padding up under the hip, right? I always used to do that, but I've changed the way that I practice and teach this. And what I find is, as long, like with no padding, there is a tendency for the hips to drift off to the left. But as long as I'm conscious of that and I can keep the hip center, I get better gains in mobility by allowing my hip to drift down toward the earth with no block or support. Blow your heart forward, whether it's onto a bolster or a block of the earth. So I started reading this book, The Gap and the Gain, Friday night, and I'm only a couple chapters into it, but already, like, I'm identifying probably 10 or 15 times a day. I'm in gap thinking right now. What does the gain thinking look like here? So I think this is a powerful model and mindset, and I think it could be really good for me. I think it could be really good for lots of other people as well. How often, when that anger response comes up, is like the anger a response to, I think or I wish that things were different than how they are right now? And start to lift yourself up out of this sleeping swan pose. Come back into tabletop first. You can slide the bolster out of the way for now. And then side saddle your legs off to the side. Come onto your back. I'm going to do a nautilus pose. So go eagle legs. Wrap your right knee over your left. Walk your hips over to the right. Lift both knees up as if you were trying to touch yourself on the chin. And then bring your left hand to your right shin, just below the knee. Draw your right knee down towards your left shoulder. I also think how we respond to the anger makes a difference to how it manifests. Right? And that seems obvious. So let me clarify exactly what I mean. I feel like a lot of times we try to suppress it or we try to push it away. But if we can recognize the anger for when it comes up, recognize it for what it is, maybe invite it to sit with us for notice where we feel it in the body. So for me, that tight fist, that constriction around my heart is a pretty typical physical manifestation of anger for me in my body. And then get into inquiry around that. What is this telling me? What is the need that I have right now that's not met? Am I in gap thinking? Did somebody step into my boundary, step over my boundary? Or did I have a boundary that I didn't express for whatever reason because I was fearful? Or because I've had negative reprisals with this person in previous circumstances where I tried to establish and maintain this boundary. But get into inquiry. If we can get into inquiry, get really curious about what is really happening here. And what is it that the whole organism, my body needs from me in this situation? We're going to release the side, lower your feet down to the earth, release your right shin, bring your hips back to center, unwind your legs, and then sit up for the other side. Wrap your left knee over your right, walk your hips over to the left, lift your knees up towards your chin, and then right hand to your left shin just below the knee. Guide your left knee down towards your right shoulder. I didn't cue this on the other side. One more option here. I'm not going to take it. Sometimes I see people kind of naturally and organically here take their hands out to the pinky edge blades of the feet and go into more of a cow face pose. If that's what your inclination is here, I feel like that does the same thing. It's at a bit higher level of sensation, but it's absolutely an option.
The last thing that I'll say, the last thought about anger that I have that I'll share in the final shape of our practice, not the final resting shape, but the final yin shape. I'll give you some time, some quiet, and some silence to just process your experience. Like I also think we need to be careful and make sure that we're like working with ourselves and working in the rest of the people of our lives to do everything that we can to foster and support an environment where all people know that they can experience, it's okay for them to experience a full range of human emotions. So we live in a society where there's a lot of pressure on women to not express or feel anger, right? So we basically say, women, you are not allowed to feel anger. And for men, I feel like the pressure is just the opposite. The only emotion that is really okay, that we can really live with you feeling, is anger, right? And I think this hurts all of us, and it robs us of our humanity. Of like, there are anger-inducing circumstances that come up. Of course, women are allowed to feel anger. It's a natural human emotion. And for men, of course, they're going to feel fear and grief and joy and love, and that the other whole range of human emotions, and that's okay and beautiful and natural. So I have some thoughts on this, but I'll just leave you with this question. What is it to live in a world, to create a world for yourself where you allow yourself to feel the full range of human emotions? And what does it look like for you to support the people in your life in allowing them to know that it's safe for them to experience the full range of human emotion? Release the nautilus pose, unwind your legs, reach your arms out over your head, take a full body stretch. And then we'll close with banana asana. Walk your feet off to the right until the point where your right hip point starts to lift up. Walk your arms over to the right as well until the right shoulder starts to lift up, or stop short if you get above a 6 on our scale of sensation. Now, this will be a shorter pose than most other yin poses, or the one we typically do. So right away, if your body wants more sensation, cross your left ankle over your right and take a couple fingers of your right hand, loop them around your left wrist, drag the fingers of your left hand further over to the right as well. Release your left ankle, release your left wrist, come back to center. Take another full body stretch, and then we'll change sides. Walk your feet off to the left, walk your arms off to the left. And at any point, if you're ready to add sensation, you've got the tools you need to do that. Release your right ankle, release your right wrist, come back to center. Take another full body stretch. And then sit up into any final resting shape where you feel supported and held. It might be on your seat, your belly, your back, or your side.
to draw some deeper breaths. And then begin to reanimate your body with small movements, maybe wiggling your fingers or your toes, or maybe something with your neck. Start to go bigger. Rotate your hands at the wrists, your feet at the ankles. If you're on your back with a bend in your knees and the soles of your feet on the earth, you could drop your knees from side to side, windshield wiper your legs. You take a full body stretch. And then press up into any seated position. Any soft eyes for now. And bring the palms of your hands together in front of your face. Rub the palms of your hands together. Lots of friction. Warm your hands. And then take the heels of your hands at the base of your eye socket. Start to tweeze your elbows together in front of you. And I like your shoulders over your hips, but release your forehead forward. So the whole socket of your eyes are cupped, cradled, and supported by the palms of your hands. Start to lift the crown of your head up to center. Release the heels of your hands. Place your thumbs on the inside upper eye socket of both eyes. Apply a slight upward pressure of your thumbs toward the stars, a slight downward pressure of your chin toward the earth. Bring your chin back to neutral. Release your thumbs. Place the index fingers on the bottom center of both eye sockets. Apply slight upward pressure of your chin up toward the stars and a slight downward pressure of your index fingers down toward the earth. Bring your chin back to neutral. Release your hands, maybe thumbs at your sternum, hands at heart center. Thank you once again, friend, for moving and breathing with me. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you be safe. And may you know peace. If you move to do so, draw your thumbs to the space between your eyebrows. Blessings to you and your family. And that concludes our practice for today. Great job, friends. Once again, I'm Chris. I'm from Transformation Nation Yoga and Wellness. Thank you for joining us for our Sunrise Yin Fire and Wood sequence. You're doing amazing. Just keep going.